Brothers and sisters, aloha. My name is Joel Reese, and I represent the Faculty Advisory Council as the Vice Chair. Today, we are honored to present the David O. Mckay Lecture during this normally scheduled devotional hour. We appreciate all those who have worked to put on this event. We would like to acknowledge those with us on the stand today: President John Tanner and his wife Susan Tanner, Associate Academic Vice President of Faculty David Bybee, members of the FAC participating in this program, and this year's David O. Mckay Lecturer, Dr. Jim Tular and his wife Beth Tueller. We also welcome all of you in the audience to this historic David O. Mckay Lecture, and thank you for being here. We will now begin with an invocation by Dr. Matt Bowen, Assistant Professor of Religion.
Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for the opportunity that we have to come together as a BYU Ohana to hear Dr. Jim Tular speak. We're grateful for him. We're grateful for his years of service. We're grateful for his example to the other faculty and staff on this campus. We pray that that would bless him, that he'll be able to convey the thoughts and remarks that he's prepared, and that the Holy Ghost will be with us and carry what he has to say to our hearts. We pray that we will feel of the Spirit and allow those things into our hearts, and that as we learn from what he has to say about family history and primary sources, that we'll take the principles that he teaches and find ways to apply them so that we can be more effective at our family history, and that in so doing that we'll bless lives on this side of the veil and on the other side of the veil, and that we'll draw nearer to the Savior and to thee. Father, we love thee. We're grateful for the many blessings that we have, and we acknowledge that we've been richly blessed, and pray that we will make use of these blessings to uplift and bless one another, and to help in carrying this great work forward. And these things we ask humbly, and do so in the name of thy beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Bowen. I would like to invite you all to the panel discussion with Dr. Jim Tular taking place in the ballroom at 3:30 p.m. later today. We will now announce the 2020 David O. Mckay Lecture for next year. Faculty members were all invited to submit nominations. After careful consideration, it is my pleasure to announce that Dr. Marcus Martins has been selected as the David O. Mckay Lecturer for 2020. We look forward to his address a year from now. We now invite President John Tanner to come forward and present an award to this year's 2019 David O. Mckay Lecturer. Following the award presentation by President Tanner, David Bybee, our Associate Academic Vice President for Faculty, will introduce our speaker. After Dr. Jim Tular has concluded, Dr. Isaiah Walker, Professor of History, will offer our benediction. President Tanner.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. For this wonderful occasion, I want to greet you with a big aloha. Aloha. On the back of your program, you'll notice a list of all the prior David O. Mckay lecturers. It's quite a list. We invite any of the past David O. Mckay lecturers that are here in the audience to stand and be recognized. Would you all stand up if you're here? Thank you very much. We welcome your attendance. Today, we're adding another distinguished member of the faculty to this wonderful group of past lecturers. Dr. Jim Tular, will you please join me here? Dr. Tueller has consistently demonstrated what it means to be a David O. Mckay lecturer. He has been nominated by faculty members and approved by the Board of Trustees. The title of the David O. Mckay Lecture is one of the highest honors that can be bestowed upon faculty members at BYU, Hawaii. We look forward to hearing your insights from your field of study and reflections on the gospel. Now, at this time, it's my pleasure to present to you this plaque, which commemorates this day, and with it, this check.
Thank you.
So take your family out to eat. I just noticed his wisdom that he's delivered the check to his wife. You see what a smart man.
Brothers and sisters, aloha. James B. Tueller has been a member of the faculty at Brigham Young University, Hawaii since August 1997. Before moving to Laie, he received his PhD in history at Columbia University in New York City. Jim was born in Morocco, where his father worked in the Tangier Consulate of the United States of America. With his father's assignments, he's also lived in Caracas, Venezuela, Panama City, Panama, Manila, Philippines, and Madrid, Spain. His first book, entitled Good and Faithful Christians, Moriscos and Catholicism in Early Modern Spain, was published in 2002. It examines the Morisco expulsion from Spain in 1609 and how the descendants of forcibly baptized Christians adapted to a century's worth of Catholicism. In 2014, he also co-authored the book Navigating the Spanish Lake, the Pacific in the Iberian World from 1521 to 1898. This history explores examples of the Spanish Empire in the Pacific Ocean. His current projects include maritime history, children's stories, and history education. Along with history, family is very important to Jim. He is the son of Jean Marie Haywood and Blaine Carlson Tueller. He has one brother, 8 sisters, 8 sisters-in-law, 6 brothers-in-law, 4 daughters, 1 son, and many more members of an extended family. He feels very fortunate that his wife, Beth Dalton, agreed to marry him 30 years ago. Dr. Tueller.
Thanks, Brother Bybee. Make me cry. Brothers and sisters, aloha. I express gratitude to the Faculty Advisory Committee for the invitation to deliver the 2019 David O. Mckay Lecture. I participate today as the 56th lecturer. I feel honored to be included among the previous men and women who, as the program states, extended a degree of respect to the memory of the 9th President of the Church, David O. Mckay. President Mckay dedicated this campus. His words inspire the CCH BYU Hawaii community to build peace internationally and to become genuine gold. 3 history professors before me have also delivered this lecture. In 1969, Robert D. Craig presented not the orthodox view of one Christian church emanating from Rome, but showed that the early Christian churches were never really united but grew separately. In 1984, Kenneth W. Baldridge entitled his talk, "And They Shall Cry from the Dust." He focused his remarks on oral history and his projects to record first-person accounts. Professor Baldridge's recordings and transcriptions are available for use in the BYU Hawaii archives. Lance D. Chase, the 3rd history professor to deliver the Mckay Lecture in 1988, spoke about the idea of a Mormon university. He urged listeners to think about the mundane reality of university education and the ideal of divine learning. All 3 historians have provided inspiration for my remarks today. Paul Venn, born in 1930, wrote an excellent book about what historians do and do not do. He wrote that historical criticism has only one function: to answer the question asked of it by the historian. I believe that this document teaches me this. May I trust it to do that? In English, Venn's book is entitled Writing History, Essay on Epistemology. Students in my classes will remember my insistence on answering epistemological questions. How do we know about the past outside of our own experience? We need to ask, how do we know? For Venn and for me today, and I hope Professors Craig, Baldridge, and Chase, we rely on primary sources, judging reliability and analyzing information. Lanny Britch, a former BYU Hawaii academic vice president and also historian, said he trained to be skeptical, but not cynical. Many David O. Mckay lectures have told about personal memories and experiences about President Mckay. I do not have personal memories of him. He died when I was 3 years old. So how do I know about him? I rely on others. My parents talked about him. Primary teachers taught me about him. I read biographies about him. I can even study the mural on the Mckay building in front of the flag circle. We learn about the dead in the past with historical research. In every history class, we study primary sources. Sam Weinberg, a professor of education and history at Stanford University, described how history teachers helped high school students study a document from the past. The teacher asked the whole class, "What's the first thing we do when we look at a document?" The class learned to chime in unison, "Source!" Throughout this presentation today, I'd like you to repeat with me, "Source!" as I introduce you, thank you, introduce you to history, and especially your family history, by looking at primary sources. Professor Weinberg teaches us, in this really great book, I'd recommend it, that despite our smartphones, the best learning skills we can gain in life are not from machines, but from the experiences we have, the relationships we gain, the questions we ask. Now to the primary source. Please look at the screen. There are names on the left side. What's the first thing we do when we look at a document? Source! Thank you. I will lead you to the sources soon, but for now examine the screen and names. Jacob and Margareta were married in 1854. The primary source for this fact is a marriage certificate. Over the next 28 years, Margareta gave birth to 13 children, 11 sons and 2 daughters. As you can see on the list, Rosa, Samuel, and Adolf died as infants or children. We know all the births and early deaths from death certificates, primary sources. What else can we know about this family just from the information given? The information derives from state records, not unusual in the 1800s. You may be already thinking, Margareta was a healthy, strong woman. She gave birth to 13 children. 10 of the 13 children survived past infancy. We might take a moment here and do a think, pair, share. You turn to a neighbor and say, anything else you can get from this given information? It's 2 parents and 13 children. Think for a second. What does that tell us? Well, what can primary sources about birth, marriages, and deaths tell us about the past? Family reconstitution sounds really complicated. It's not. It's been a historical project with many contributors, resulting in important insights into our ancestors' pasts. By looking at primary sources, we can find both changes and continuities. For example, here's the same list of names with a right side added, a little bit smaller. Again, the family is large. We're going to get to that screen with 2 families, hopefully. This is a family of Christian and Elizabeth, who had 10 children. The screen will be coming. In the first 22 years, I'll introduce you to Christian and Elizabeth, who had 12 children, 10 sons and 2 daughters. Daniel Howard died before reaching 1 year old. With the list of 2 families, here we are. What insight or analysis can you give? So, and again, Jacob and Margareta, Christian and Elizabeth. Well, what do we get by just looking at their names? Parents decide their children's names. They're the parents. They gave the children their names. Maybe you notice the difference in the names given to the children. Christian and Elizabeth gave their children first names and middle names. Did you notice an ethnic origin? Notice Margareta's name and my pronunciation. Did you see Christian as son in one list and father in the other? You're right, it's the same person. Born in Switzerland, Jacob and Margareta spoke German as their first language. What do you think happened with Christian and Elizabeth as parents? What kind of names did they give their children? Well, why? Elizabeth spelled her name as Germans did, with an S. Her daughter, Adeline, spelled her middle name, Elizabeth, with a Z, like the King James English Bible does. The surface change of German to English American names shows the deeper change of Jacob's and Margareta's conversion. Now, did anyone notice the fourth child's name of Christian and Elizabeth? Lyman Nephi? They and their children joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Jacob and his second son, Johannes, were baptized on May 30th, 1875. Margareta was baptized a month later on June 27th, 1875. The other children were baptized over the next year. Christian immigrated first to the USA in 1877, and the family followed over the next 7 years. Jacob and Margareta arrived in the United States and moved to Paris, Idaho in 1884. Christian had helped the family with his American earnings, and then at age 25, he returned to serve a mission in the Swiss-German mission. The Church History Library has the registers of LDS missionaries. It's a great online database full of primary sources. When Christian returned to Idaho, 2 von Allman sisters, Elizabeth and Mariana, traveled with him. Christian married Elizabeth in the Logan Temple in 1890. Here's the registers that you can find in the Early Mormon Missionaries database. You can all look it up on Google. Maybe you have an ancestor who's there. Well, Mariana, the older sister, married John Flukiger, another Swiss-born convert, as her parents in Switzerland wished. The von Allman parents in Switzerland wanted Elizabeth to marry Gottlieb Flukiger, but she chose to marry Christian instead. The 2 sisters were married on the same day in Logan. The 2 photographs of the von Allman sisters demonstrate the immediacy of primary sources. Here you see a picture, I think on the wedding day, of Elizabeth and Christian in 1890. Elizabeth was 22 years old. Next to it, a photograph of Mariana took place after the birth of her second child, John Joseph, in March 1894. In the photograph, Mariana would have been about 29 years old. That should be coming up soon, too. The primary sources we examine remind us that living people produce them, even more so in family history. Their features, their biology, their mannerisms reach down to us. They also connect to siblings, brothers and sisters, who we are more alike than anyone else. There's that picture. Look at those 2 beautiful sisters. Clearly, they are related. Well, Christian and Elizabeth gave both family names and American names to their children. William von Allman Tueller, Golden Richard Tueller, Dallas Owen Tueller. Palmer Leland, the 10th child, was nicknamed Tom. He had a garage in Paris, Idaho, and died young at age 42. His grandson is the current BYU Hawaii Vice President for Administration, Steve Tueller. Lamont Edwin Tueller, the 6th child, is my grandfather. I knew my grandfather. I have vivid memories of him. He passed away in 1976 in my 10th year of life. Steve never knew his Tueller grandfather, but through primary sources, documents, oral histories, and artifacts, we both can draw our hearts closer to our ancestors. Many of the primary sources for this Tueller family history are available at familysearch.org. Other details derive from an edited volume of family memories compiled at the Jacob Tueller reunions in 1955 and 1965. Angie Bush, a 3rd cousin, reprinted the book. Oh, and then this picture, this is the family of Christian and Elizabeth. Palmer is Palmer Leland, Uncle Tom. He is the young 11-year-old boy standing behind his brother. My grandfather, Lamont, is standing 3rd from the left next to his sister, Adeline. So again, we see the relationships. These are real people. Well, with primary sources, I try to pay attention, read carefully, and think about the surprises, the differences, and the similarities. I like how Carla Nappi, a historian of science in China, explains her method in reading primary sources. She writes, oh, and here's the Tueller history book. It's just privately published, but very much important in gathering memories of the Tueller family. You probably have some of those in your family library. Well, Carla Nappi, in thinking about primary sources, says that reading primary sources is a way of moving through the world and activating parts of our environment in the process, identifying and creating objects and locations, and through the movement are of attention, relating them to each other as part of a coherent and ephemeral fabric. She tries to move away from origins, causes, effects, and consequences, telling a history of juxtaposition. She calls it hashtag, or juxtapositional history. I like that. A hashtag is juxtapositional, all crossed together. Primary sources include artifacts from the past. Most elements of the past have gone where moth and rust doth corrupt. But those that survive can tell us about who produced it, why it was produced, and why it survived. An artifact can be as simple as and here's Carla Nappi. Great, we're catching there. The artifact can be as simple as this big pen in my pocket. The pen can tell us about the history of inks, plastics, markets, and writing. Artifacts can also be much more singular and famous. For example, look at this 1627 drawing by Vicente Carducho with pencil, ink, and watercolor. What's the first thing we do when we look at a document? Source. Thank you. They exist as tangible objects, ink on paper, surviving the years. The Prado Museum in Madrid, Spain, owns this artifact because Carducho served as a painter in the court of Philip IV. Carducho, a Florentine from Italy, immigrated to Spain with his older brother to paint. We have surviving evidence of his work, his art, and even his published book. However, we remember him mostly because of his well-known rival, Diego de Velázquez. In 1627, Carducho competed against other painters to receive a royal commission. Diego Velázquez won the competition. Carducho and Velázquez became rivals and even enemies. Carducho wrote a treatise in 1633, the one that was just up there, decrying the manner of painting without rules, without theory, without learning and meditation. He was criticizing Velázquez. In the 1627 competition, both artists chose the same subject for their paintings, the 1609 expulsion of the Moriscos under the king's father, Philip III. The paintings from the 1627 competition were destroyed in the 1734 fire that also destroyed the royal palace in Madrid. The current royal palace was built on the same site. But the small drawing by Carducho survived. Primary sources need not be government documents or even words on a page. Paintings, buildings, and ruins are also sources for the past. In Carducho's pencil drawing, we have a story about a rivalry, destruction in a fire, and the subject of the drawing, the expulsion of the Moriscos, that influenced both painters' lives. By 1627, the expulsion, which began in 1609 and concluded in 1614, had been declared a success, hence the competition to remember the king's father. Despite the triumphalism, however, an undercurrent of shame persisted as so many who had loved Spain had been expelled. The expulsion also created many enemies, like the Sally Rovers, and left depopulated and destitute significant regions of the peninsula. Philip IV had even allowed, with deliberate neglect, some Moriscos to return to noble lands and regain their home and properties. Even in 1615, Miguel de Cervantes created a Morisco character in Book 2 of Don Quixote named Ricote, who returned to Spain and unexpectedly met his neighbor Sancho Panza. Well, now that you know a bit of the context, the provenance, the origins for the Carducho drawing and the 1627 competition, I would like to turn our attention more closely to this primary source. The drawing easily identifies the port of Denia in southeastern Spain. Carducho might have seen the paintings of Vicente Mestre, but he drew from his own experience. The drawing clearly interests me, but I'd like to ask you, what do you see, especially looking at the individuals' faces? So here's a slideshow of some close-ups of the drawing. Ask yourself, what emotions has Carducho chosen to capture in the pencil sketches? How do we know? Well, here's a soldier staring, I'd say, passively. That's my interpretation. Here's one of the Moriscos looking back longingly. I'm giving these emotions, right? Here's another one of a woman crying. Why is she crying? We should ask those questions. Another comes up. Here are people going up the gangway to the ships dejectedly. Am I giving them emotion that they didn't feel? Or are you seeing it as well? This is the one that shows you that it's Denia, but it also shows the army, the lances, the lancers in the background. Here are more tight focus of other ones. Here's a mother with a child at her skirt, pushing towards the ship, leaving her home. What would you feel? And here is a soldier forcibly, go, leave. Am I giving words to that, or do we see that in the drawing? Of course, this is all filtered through Carducho, but one of the last ones, a soldier implicated in this. Is he also being sad, or is he just following orders? And then a last one, I think, of a woman. Is she looking back with tears in her eyes? Well, there are histories of emotion showing us that the expression, the embodiment of emotions have changed. If a source tells us that Napoleon 200 years ago had a fit of rage, do we know what rage was for him? Are emotions universal, felt equally by all people in all times and places? Initially, I say no, since as individuals we feel and react differently. I teach that the past is different, but when reading a primary source or looking at a drawing from the past, I see it through my eyes, feel it through my body, think it through with my rationales. And as for place, there is no better place than BYU Hawaii to learn that place, geographic origin, and culture dispose us to feel differently. Certainly there are cultural and linguistic differences in emotions that outsiders cannot feel. Hawaiian language and cultural depth reminds us that even the word aloha contains multitudes of meaning that just do not translate. And yet, those documents are in front of me. Despite performances, displays, language differences, basic emotions, happiness, anger, disgust, fear, sadness, and surprise, humanize us all. How individuals expressed and felt individually links to time and place. That's the historian in me. But thinking and feeling can cross time and place, allowing us to feel what others experience to a degree, even if not perfect. I wonder what the Moriscos expelled from Spain felt. In turn, I wonder what the people who expelled them thought. What of those who just watched the expelled leave? When we think historically, we do not just ask what happened, but also why did it happen, which in this case comes down to human choices, mentalities, and emotions. Fear, disgust, surprise, sadness, happiness, anger. These too were part of the expulsion of the Moriscos. We've looked at two primary sources so far. My third and final primary source is a manuscript, which I have been reading as part of a research project about the Spanish Empire in the Pacific. So what's the first thing we do when we look at a source? Source. Thank you. So this source was written by a secretary. His name was Nicolás de Borja, and he wrote it in 1807. Borja worked as the secretary to the governor of Guam, Alejandro Pareño, and here's where Guam is. Today, Guam is a territory of the United States. It's 8 hours by airplane west and south of Honolulu. From the 1521 voyage of Ferdinand Magellan until the Spanish-American War of 1898, the Marianas Islands were part of the Spanish Empire. The king appointed Pareño royal governor of the Marianas Islands from 1806 to 1812. I think the document illustrates the challenges, joys, frustrations, and insights that come to those who study the past. Well, how do we know about this document from more than 200 years ago? Well, I read a digital copy in FamilySearch.org. FamilySearch has uploaded 92,039 images from the University of Guam's Micronesian Area Research Center and its Spanish documents collection. These are the paper records that survived in Guam despite the humidity, wars, earthquakes, typhoons, and accidents. Previously known as the Genealogical Society of Utah, FamilySearch is the genealogy organization operated and owned by the church. Many of you access the website to submit names for temple work, to index historical records, and to extract names for family history. Some may even use it to post photos of their ancestors or upload memories about their relatives. I also do these very same things. But Family Search also makes accessible millions of primary sources. I have accessed parish registers from 1609 to write about the Morisco expulsion. I spent weeks reading all the documents scanned from the San Pedro Makati Parish in Manila for a study I wrote about world history in the Philippines. Well, today I will tell a story about a homicide investigation in 1807 on Guam, led by Governor Pareño and written down in an easy cursive by Nicolas de Borja, the secretary. In mid-October 1807, the governor and his clerk questioned 36-year-old Francisco Quitaoji, the accused, about why he killed Elias Topasnia. Quitaoji refused to answer some questions, and so the governor brought in an interpreter to ask the questions again in Chamorro, the language of the Marianas Islands. Borja, the secretary, was clearly frustrated and wrote in the document, quote, "The confessant says he has not understood what has been said to him after 4 hours of listening to his confession." The interpreter, Manuel Tiburcio Garrido, also acted as Quitaoji's defense attorney. Garrido served as a soldier in one of the 2 companies on Guam, and by 1807 was the second assistant to the governor. Garrido, most likely born on Guam, spoke Chamorro, but he had also joined the Spanish army and served on Guam. Garrido spoke and read Spanish well enough to translate for the court proceedings. Well, I'm not going to have an answer here, but I just don't know why Francisco Quitaoji killed Elias Topasnia. Quitaoji, the accused, admitted to stabbing Topasnia just below the heart. Governor Pareño asked many questions. Why and how did Quitaoji have such a large knife, which he used to stab Topasnia? When questioned, Francisco Quitaoji explained that he harvested tuba, which is the nectar from coconut blossom. Tuba is so sweet, it almost immediately becomes alcoholic with the natural yeast in the air around the trees. Tuba nectar becomes palm wine, or toddy, with 4% alcohol in about 2 hours. I initially thought that Quitaoji and Topasnia had a dispute about palm wine, a drunken brawl. But also the son of the gobernadorcillo, that was the local leader in Agate, south of Agana on Guam, where the murder occurred, was also somehow involved with the dispute. Quitaoji brought up the fact that the gobernadorcillo's son called him from his house. When he came out, Topasnia hit Quitaoji with clubs, garroteado in Spanish. At that moment, Quitaoji took out his tuba knife and stabbed Topasnia. The governor and his clerk interviewed 19 witnesses. They asked Mariano Lujan and Vicente Muña questions about the knife, since both were identified as master knife makers. They also questioned Domingo Laguaña, a corn farmer who found the knife behind the cellars of the small town of Fuuña while searching with 11 others. Javier Quidagua took the knife that had a corn leaf sheath, knowing that Quitaoji was the owner. The specificity of the details and the eyewitnesses draw my attention. The witnesses answered carefully and with trepidation before the governor. Even with the frightening violence, details about daily life illuminate their choices. Quitaoji had a large, sharp knife, seemingly rare and thus notable because he was a tubero, cutting coconut blossoms for the juice. Guam had master knife makers among the village of Agate. The village of Agate, which still exists, has a nearby village of Fuuña with cellars. Those are diggings. The Spanish word in the document is cavas. In the document, Fuuña was a village. Well, that village does not exist today. But a 1752 map of Guam included an island named Fuuña off the coast of Agate. So maybe the corn bed and the pueblo of Fuuña were close. Well, corn leaves became practical tools, serving as a sheath. Witnesses responded to questions about reputation. The victim, Elias Topasnia, was known as a vilango, a contemptible man. Defense witnesses testified that the victim was making trouble, albotorado. Other witnesses declared that everything Quitaoji, the accused, said was nulo y falso, invalid and false. Well, court proceedings and witness testimonies, as practiced throughout the Spanish Empire, also followed into Guam. I'm especially interested in the Spanish Chamorro translation. Quitaoji asked for and received a translator, the second assistant, Manuel Tiburcio Garrido. The governor was not surprised or even frustrated by the need of translation. Chamorro language did not lose out to Imperial Spanish. Many of the surnames survive in later documents of Guam, and some even into today. From one homicide case, we cannot predict world events. Nevertheless, a micro-history points us to the context, the feel of life in the Spanish Empire. Well, the abrupt conclusion of the trial also typifies the challenge of working with primary sources. Governor Pareño did not have the authority to execute Kitaohi. He sent the papers to the audiencia, the royal courts in Manila, with a recommendation to execute. He reasoned that this homicide was only the second in 64 years, and that Kitaohi should be made an example of judicial power. Governor Pareño reported that people laughed at the punishments of banishment, shackles, or lashings. The court papers left Umatic Harbor on December 16, 1807. And I have yet to find a reply or know what happened to Francisco Kitaohi, other than remaining incarcerated indefinitely. A murder investigation in Guam opens a window into the final years of Spanish imperial rule, but it does not conclude the story. I have to look for other conclusions. Well, only the first primary source is from my personal family history. The first and third primary sources I access through FamilySearch.com, as you can as well. The second primary source, remember, was a drawing in the Prado Museum and serves as a physical artifact, a way to write a history of a thing. For today's purposes, we have dived deeply into primary sources, finding out about historical methods. Well, what then should we do about it? What's the first thing we do when we look at a source? A document? Source. I got to get this right. At a minimum, I remind us that we have an obligation to turn our hearts to the fathers, thoughtfully consider their lives, and analyze their past choices. Malachi's warning about the great and dreadful day of the Lord reminds me that remembering our ancestors prepares us to meet God. Not only do we take their names to the temple, but also we can seek to know them and serve them. As you would expect, family history provides me with great joy. I benefit from knowing how my ancestors' lives fit into the passage of time. As you saw with my primary source, we can learn much about them from past documents, bringing them together in both personal and analytical ways. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints provides the booklet, My Family, Stories That Bring Us Together. We can use it to interview our living relatives and research into those who are deceased. I urge us to do more. Take a family history class from the Department of Religious Education. Enroll in a history class. I encourage students to write research papers that incorporate their family history into the wider world of historical research. Our library has access to scholarly journals like the Journal of Family History, which has been in publication since 1976. Family history brings together individual family stories with numerical analysis and average experiences of the past. I highly recommend a 1965 book chapter by John Haynall entitled European Marriage Pattern in Perspective. In that chapter, he summarized primary source research by others into European family history of the previous 60 years. Haynall, not a historian, actually taught statistics at Manchester University and later the London School of Economics. In Wikipedia, you can find the Haynall line. It's named for him. He used primary research of others to show an overall pattern using population histories from England, France, Germany, and Italy. He described a unique pattern of marriage in Western Europe where there was a high age of marriage and a high proportion of people who never married. Researchers matched birth or baptismal records with the marriage records of bride and groom to determine their age of marriage. For example, Etienne Gautier and Louis Henry focused their study on the parish registers of Crueil in Normandy, France, publishing their findings in 1958. By reconstituting families from the birth, marriage, and death records, they could see how families continued through the generations. Between 1674 and 1742, they found that the mean age of first marriage for men was 26.6 years, and for women, 25.1. Well, now the average age of marriages do not tell me about the marriages of my ancestors. Average age cannot tell us when a specific person married, but the average tells us about expected behavior. In Family Search, I can confirm with my Swiss ancestors that they married at those comparatively higher ages of marriage. Willem Tueller from Saanen at age 28 married Anantje Emsworth from Saanen, age 27, in 1559. As industrialization and factory work increased in Europe, especially for women, the average age of my ancestors dropped to the early 20s. Jacob and Margaretha, the first examples today, married at ages 23 and 18. Age of marriage will affect the number of children on average that a mother will have. Age of marriage might also influence the resources and wealth that the married couple starts their family. Indeed, in 2004, Mary Hartman wrote The Household and the Making of History, a subversive view of the Western past, proposing that the foundations of capitalism and the spirit of entrepreneurship began with the high age of first marriage among women in areas of Europe. Well, tangible primary sources as surviving artifacts from the past help us answer epistemological questions. How do we know? We cannot just quote sources. We must analyze, use our imaginations, and consider what others have thought. In the research journal, The History Teacher, Kevin Riley urged students to develop an ability to empathize and imagine with the foreign. Students should develop an awareness, even an appreciation of cultural and human diversity. At least the student should not automatically assume that the foreign is similar or the exotic wrong. At best, this awareness will deepen the student's sense of human possibilities and thus the student's own humanity. As we learn about people and their choices in the past, we become more aware of our choices and ourselves. The stories we tell reflect the lives we live and the hopes we hope. Look for the stories and find the stories, the narratives within them. Stories told from the evidence of primary sources represent the past. We present the past again. Elie Wiesel, a telling author and survivor of Nazi concentration camps, urged his listeners in 1974 with these words, "Let us tell tales. That is our primary obligation. Let us tell tales so as to remember how vulnerable man is when faced with overwhelming evil. Let us tell tales so as not to allow the executioner to have the last word." We can do family history. We are doing it. You might be humming the primary song, "Family history, I am doing it, my family history. And the love I feel when I am doing it is very sweet to me." Look for the primary sources. Read, examine, and analyze the sources carefully. Within the constraints of the past, imagine what your ancestors experienced. Tell tales and remember. Thank you very much.